Imagine being stopped by the police, minding your own business, only to find yourself at the center of an unjust situation. That's exactly what happened to the commissioner's wife. It started as a routine day, nothing out of the ordinary. She was driving through the city when flashing lights appeared in her rearview mirror. The officers claimed it was a random search, but something didn't feel right. Despite her calm demeanor and polite cooperation, the situation quickly escalated. They searched her car, questioned her endlessly, and treated her with suspicion. Little did they know who they were dealing with. When she finally made a call, her husband, the police commissioner, arrived on the scene. That's when things took an unexpected turn, leaving everyone stunned. What happened next was nothing short of shocking, and it left the officers scrambling to justify their actions. Stay tuned as this gripping story unfolds. The commissioner's wife, Sarah, had always been known for her grace and calm composure. She wasn't one to attract attention, especially from law enforcement. Yet as the minutes ticked by, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The officers, who were usually respectful and professional, seemed unusually tense and dismissive. Sarah's instincts told her that they weren't just following protocol. She had heard whispers of corruption within the department, but never imagined it would affect her own family. The search was invasive, even though there was no reason for it. The officers acted like they were looking for something hidden, something dangerous. Sarah tried to stay composed, but the unease grew. She knew she had to reach out to her husband. As soon as she did, things took a dramatic turn. The officers froze when they saw his car pull up, but what happened next was even more shocking. What was the real reason for this search? As the commissioner's car skidded to a stop, the officers stood frozen, exchanging nervous glances. Sarah, still in the back seat of her car, felt a wave of relief wash over her. Her husband, Michael, had arrived. But even he seemed unsettled by the sight of his officers acting out of line. He was well respected, a man known for his integrity and dedication to justice. Yet today, his authority seemed almost irrelevant in this tense moment. Michael stepped out of his car, his eyes scanning the scene, quickly picking up on the awkwardness in the air. The officers seemed to shrink under his gaze. Sarah could tell something was off, but Michael hadn't yet spoken a word. He approached the officers, his voice calm but firm, demanding an explanation for the search. But the officers hesitated, stumbling over their words, avoiding direct eye contact with him. The entire situation was strange. Michael's mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Were his officers simply acting on their own? Or was there something deeper going on here? He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the search wasn't about his wife or her car. It felt personal, as if someone had given a secret order to humiliate him. But who and why? As Michael stood there, piecing it all together, Sarah felt her heart race. She was starting to realize that this wasn't just an isolated incident. Her husband's position, his work, perhaps even their family's safety, was now at risk. There was something more to this than just a random search. The tension thickened, and they both knew they were standing at the edge of something much larger than they could have imagined. But what? The air was thick with tension as Michael continued to stare down the officers. Their uneasy shifting told him everything he needed to know. Something wasn't right. He asked again, his voice barely a whisper, but cutting through the silence like a knife. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his words firm, but his mind was racing. Every part of him wanted to trust his team, but the fear creeping up his spine told him that this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. The officers exchanged glances once more, and then, as if they had been waiting for something, one of them stepped forward. It was Officer Daniels, a younger man who had only recently been promoted. He was sweating, his eyes darting nervously between Michael and Sarah. "Sir, we were just following orders," he muttered, his voice low. That was it, the words that confirmed Michael's worst fears. Someone, somewhere had ordered this. But who? And why? Michael's mind was spinning. He knew his department, his team, and their loyalty. He had spent years building trust with them. But this felt like a betrayal. He turned to Sarah, her face pale, and saw the fear in her eyes. She hadn't spoken a word since his arrival, but it was clear she was just as lost as he was. "We need answers," now Michael said, his voice more forceful than before. Out. It wasn't anyone he recognized at first glance, but the moment they locked eyes, Michael understood. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they were still too scattered, too blurry. And with every passing second, the danger grew. This wasn't just about his wife anymore. This was about a conspiracy that threatened to unravel everything he had worked for. As the figure stepped out of the SUV, Michael's heart skipped a beat. The man was dressed in a sharp black suit, his face hidden behind dark sunglasses. He had an air of authority, something dangerous about him. For a moment, Michael tried to place the man, his instincts telling him he had seen him before. But no, this wasn't just someone from his department. This was someone higher up, much higher. The stranger moved toward them with purpose, his steps calculated. The officers, who had been nervous moments ago, now stood at attention, almost like they were waiting for his command. Michael's jaw clenched. Whoever this was, he wasn't just a bystander. He was the one pulling the strings. The man stopped just a few feet away from Michael, removing his sunglasses with slow precision. "Commissioner," he said, his voice cold, calculated. "I think we need to talk." Michael's mind raced. This was no random encounter. He felt a chill run down his spine. The situation had escalated far beyond a simple case of police misconduct. The feeling of betrayal grew stronger with every passing second. This man wasn't here to explain or apologize. He was here with a message. But what was it? Without missing a beat, the stranger continued, his tone even more chilling. "You've been getting too close, haven't you, Michael? Too close to uncovering things that were never meant to be found." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she stood beside her husband, her eyes wide with fear. She had no idea what was happening, but she could sense the danger closing in. Michael's face darkened, his fists tightening at his sides. The last thing he expected today was a confrontation like this. But now there was no turning back. Whoever this man was, he had just made it personal. Before Michael could respond, the stranger gestured toward the officers, who began to move in closer, their expressions unreadable. "You've been a good commissioner, Michael," the man said with a thin, mocking smile. "But some things are bigger than you, bigger than your little department." Michael's blood ran cold as he realized the magnitude of the situation. This wasn't just about an unfair search or police corruption. It was about a system, a network of powerful individuals who were willing to destroy everything he stood for. And worse, they were willing to use his wife to get to him. With every word, the tension in the air thickened. Michael had to make a choice, but before he could even think of a plan, the stranger dropped a bombshell that no one saw coming. "Your wife," he said with a dangerous smile, "isn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. She's part of this too." The world seemed to stop. The truth hit like a punch to the gut, and Michael felt the weight of the revelation settle in. Sarah was involved in this conspiracy. How could that be possible? But before he could ask her anything, the man raised a hand to silence him. "Time is running out, Commissioner," the stranger said, "and we'll be watching." The officers, now standing at attention, didn't even flinch. The tension was unbearable, and Michael knew that whatever happened next would change everything. Michael's mind spun as he turned to Sarah, his heart racing. Racing. He couldn't believe what he'd just heard. "What do you mean she's part of this?" he demanded, his voice rising. His eyes darted to his wife, who stood frozen beside him, her face pale, eyes wide with shock. She hadn't said a word, but her silence spoke volumes. Had she known about this all along? The stranger chuckled softly, the sound cold and unsettling. "You should have known, Commissioner. Your wife has been more involved than you think. You've been distracted, focused on the wrong things. While you were building your career, she was making connections, following a different path." Sarah shook her head, tears starting to form in her eyes. I don't know what he's talking about, Michael." "I didn't." But before she could finish, the man interrupted her, holding up a hand. "It's too late for denials," the stranger said smoothly. "The pieces are already in motion. You just don't realize how deep this runs." All's pulse pounded in his ears. He turned back to face the man, his mind racing. "What do you want?" he asked, trying to steady his voice. "What's this all about?" The stranger smiled again, an almost amused expression crossing his face. "We want you to understand, Commissioner. You're a threat to something much bigger than you know. Your position, your integrity, it's all in the way. And your wife." He trailed off, his eyes flicking to Sarah with a look that made her shiver. "She's been helping us all along." Suddenly, Sarah stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "I've never helped anyone do anything wrong, Michael," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "I've been trying to protect you, to keep you safe from everything I've been discovering." Michael blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" he asked, feeling like the ground had been pulled out from beneath him. Sarah took a deep breath. "There's been corruption, Michael. The department, the people you trust, they've been working with criminals, taking bribes. I couldn't tell you before. It was too dangerous. But I've been investigating, digging into things you couldn't see. That's why they targeted me. They thought I would be the weak link, the one who could be manipulated. But I've been trying to protect you, trying to warn you." Michael's mind reeled as he processed her words. Everything she said made sense now. The odd behavior, the unexplained circumstances. He'd been so focused on his career, his image, that he hadn't seen the cracks forming around him. But just as they were about to speak again, a new voice cut through the tension, low and authoritative. "Enough." The man in the black suit froze, as did the officers. A figure stepped out of the shadows, a woman, her face partially obscured by a hood. Michael's heart stopped when he recognized her. It was one of his closest allies, someone he trusted, someone he had worked with for years. But her expression was cold, her eyes narrowed. "You should have known," she said, her voice steady. "You were never meant to find out." Before Michael could react, she pulled out a file from beneath her coat, slamming it into his hands. "This is everything you need to know. About your wife. About your department. About the game you've been part of without even realizing it." The world seemed to slow down as Michael opened the file, his hands shaking. Inside were documents, evidence and photographs. Proof of a conspiracy that stretched farther than he could have ever imagined. His own allies, his wife's hidden connections, the dark forces controlling it all. It was a nightmare come to life. The woman stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your wife is part of something bigger than you ever realized, Michael," she said, her eyes cold. "But so are you." With that, the woman vanished into the night, leaving Michael standing there, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. He looked at Sarah, who was now staring at the file in his hands, her face unreadable. The danger was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. Michael stood in stunned silence, the file heavy in his hands, as Sarah looked at him with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. The truth was out now. Everything he had worked for, everything he thought he knew, had been shattered in a single moment. The conspiracy was deeper, more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. But there was no turning back. He turned to Sarah, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes. "We'll get through this," he whispered, though even he wasn't sure how. Together, they began to piece together the puzzle. The documents in the file revealed names, dates, and shady deals that had slipped under the radar for years. As Michael prepared to take action, he realized the weight of his role. He could expose the corruption, but it would come at a cost: his career, his safety, and possibly his marriage. But one thing was certain: he couldn't back down now. The stakes had never been higher.